This episode of the Leap Forward podcast is brought to you by Bridge LT, leaders in conversational learning and innovation. Through AI role plays, technical simulators, and comprehensive training programs, Bridge LT is revolutionizing the future of corporate and enterprise education.
On this episode of Leap Forward, we sit down with Nancy Rignall, founder and managing director of Prospecting Dynamics, to discuss her journey in the automotive industry. From her early days at Ford to leading a business focused on customer retention, Nancy shares insights on EV adoption, shifting consumer behavior, and the role of human connection in a tech-driven world. She also offers advice on navigating industry challenges and championing diversity. Let's dive in.
So I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined today by Nancy Rignall on this edition of the Leap Forward podcast. Hi, Nancy, how are you?
I'm really well, thanks, Justin. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Oh, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. For those that don't know you, just give us a brief sort of introduction and tell us a little bit about the business and the role that you play.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Prospecting Dynamics is a small, medium-sized business offering telephone-based support within the automotive industry. So our goal is to increase profit for our dealer customers by maximising customer retention through a positive customer experience. Our size, I mentioned we are a small, medium company, gives us the ability to kind of fully personalise services, and the experience and commitment that my team bring to that basically means we can work seamlessly as an extension of a dealership's own team. We provide very high quality outbound and inbound telephone services, and of course, inquiry management analysis, which gives previously unseen visibility to a customer's experience with a dealership, right from the initial telephone call, handling by the salesperson, right through to the successful or not conclusion of the sale at the end. And we provide feedback on that. We benchmark against industry average and also the top 5%. And we highlight successes and areas to focus on. My role within the business, I'm founder, managing director, however you want to call it. But 12 years in, Justin, and still I'm involved with every project and every customer. But I absolutely love it. I love it.
Well, that's the life of the founder and CEO, isn't it?
Yeah,
Ultimately,
yeah, absolutely. We can't walk away.
And here you are joining me right in the middle of budget season. So I'm so grateful for you to be with us today and finding the time to do that. So you've obviously had an incredible career to date in the sector. Tell us a little bit about how did it start, and tell us a little bit about the journey you've been on.
Oh, crikey, what a journey it's been. I mean, my career's always been automotive, but I did fall into it. It wasn't a choice. I'd love to say it was a choice, but I fell into it. But I'm so glad I did, and I can get a bit evangelical about that, Justin. I'm sure we'll come on to at the end. Me trying to drive more women into the industry, but So in my summer break after finishing university, I literally was with some friends, and we didn't want to leave straight away after, like you don't. It was like, oh, let's just have the summer together before we go. So started off working on a used car pitch. But then my career proper for the automotive industry started working with Ford Motor Company and Ford Credit, and I did 10 years. And literally, if you cut my arm off, the blue oval's still there somewhere, I have to say. But back then, when I started, it is a long time ago, working for Ford was absolutely fabulous, Justin. They had the majority share of the market by a long, long way. And the only near rival was Vauxhall. I worked with some amazing people, and whilst I was at Ford Credit, I mean, my counterparts at the motor company, I can name drop very easily here, were Paul Vanderberg, Paul Philpotts, Jeremy Thompson, of course, Julia Muir, all at Ford at the same time. So Ford was such an icon at that time. It really did attract some very talented people. I was really comfortable in my job working for Ford Credit. It was a great job and really nice to do. But one of my dealer customers offered me a job running one of his sites. And I just never looked back from there, really. It was a leap of faith on both our parts, if I'm honest, because at the time he only knew me from what he saw when I came in with my Ford badge on. And of course, I'd never run a retail operation at that stage. And I remember when I first started, I asked him if I could work a month in each department to learn, so that I would understand what service did and how parts worked, and what happened with the throughput of all that, and sitting with sales, sitting with my used car manager while he was valuing cars and various other bits and pieces, and he gave me his full blessing and full support. And I have to say, he probably remains the best boss I've ever worked for. But I have been really lucky with my bosses. Eventually, I came out of the dealer network, and I went on to head up Mapfre Abraxas. It was originally Abraxas, and then obviously bought by Mapfre, who for quite some years were the leading supplier in the industry of Gap. I think at the height of Mapfre's success, they were supplying Mercedes-Benz, Ford, Toyota, Volkswagen Group, and of course, some of the top dealer groups at the time as well, Perry's, Pendragon, Lookers. I had fabulous customers and a brilliant team to work for, working for me. Really, and things were kind of as good as they could be. But life never wants you to just get along nicely, does it? And I have to say that just when everything was going so well, I had a bit of a curveball thrown personally. I mean, I was working all over the country. I was pretty much in Bristol for 3 or 4 days a week, or wherever I needed to be with my dealer customers. And my husband at home was keeping everything going, keeping the house going. He was my rock and my support person, my soulmate, just through the whole thing. And he was diagnosed with terminal cancer in 2012. Now, Mapfre were absolutely faultless. I can't, they were brilliant. But after I'd had 6 months off work, kind of nursing him and then dragging myself out of the hole that he left afterwards, when I came back to work, my heart just really wasn't in it anymore. And I've never been a person who's been able to be working unless my heart's in it, because I've enjoyed everything I've done so much. And it was at that time I thought, I really need a change. What can I do? And thought, well, if I don't start my own business now, I'm never going to do it. I'll never do it. So, okay, right. What am I going to do? So, automotive was all I knew. It's where I felt at home. And I also had this incredible network of people that I'd met during my career, with the manufacturer of the credit company, and then supplying, and I'm working in the dealer network. I'd done kind of all the bits. So I was thinking, what can I do where I can stay in automotive? So having been a part of Ford when half a car came to this country, if anybody can remember those, you're way too young, Justin, but definitely some people will. And they brought Ford Options, the first PCP to the UK. Ford said there ought to be a better way. I could probably still do the presentation now. I was passionate about the renewals process, and the absolute sense that makes to focus on the customers that you've got before you start spending a fortune looking to attract new ones. And customer service was also something that was important to me. I had to be very focused on some of the customers I looked after when I was at Mapfre. I had to be very focused on customer service to keep those people happy. Absolutely. So Prospecting Dynamics was born, and we started really small, and grew by word of mouth referral, which must be the single best way to grow. We literally did finance renewals in the beginning, nothing else. But soon it was, can we do some CSI follow-ups? Would we be able to make some service bookings? And before we knew it, we were doing everything in every possible area where the dealer group needs to have contact with a retail customer. In effect, and this is where my contact network within the industry was just amazing and so helpful. There were a couple of people in the beginning, Justin. Without them, I'm not sure. I'm still not sure we'd be where we are now. I'd had experience of a call centre when I was at Mapfrey, because we had one based in Swindon, where if the dealer didn't sell Gap at point of sale, we would try again after the point of sale from the call centre, and we offered that as a service to dealers. So I'd had experience from that side of things, where I was the customer and they were my supplier, providing me with a service. But in terms of actually running one, or looking at how that would work and what I should be looking for. So at that time, Peter Stewart, who was Ops Director at Virtue at the time, and Paul Manning, who ran Drive Retail, still does run Drive Retail, sorry, Paul, both took me into their businesses and opened the doors and showed me their in-house contact centres from the retailer's perspective. So looking at both the challenges that they had that were brought to them, but also what the desired outcomes were for them, and how best they would achieve those, and key things I should be looking for. I mean, I had wise words of advice and support from many people whose counsel I really valued, and definitely my business is all the better for that. So here we are.
It's incredible, really, because you've got such a broad kind of perspective on the sector. You've started kind of on the pitch, and you wow, what a leap that was to go to Ford at that time. I mean, that must have just been incredible. You must have been
Really was.
Absorbing that like a sponge, right? And then you've gone dealer, and then you've become a provider to the so you've had every side of the table, and here we are, November 2024. There's a lot going on at the moment. I'm not going to be glass half empty. I'm not going to be glass half full, but there's a lot going on, right? Give me and you've also got this sort of real time kind of insight kind of through the business in terms of how that's playing out in the market. So share with me some of your kind of perspectives of the challenges, that the industry's facing right now, and how are you helping the industry overcome them?
Crikey. Yeah, there are a lot of challenges for the industry at the moment. I mean, it's always a challenge, and it's always been a challenge. And it's amazing how resilient this industry is. I mean, there are some fabulous people who are very, very positive, but having been in the industry well over 30 years now, I've seen it bounce back so many times from so many things. The one thing you can absolutely guarantee in this industry is there's nothing more constant than change. It's always there. And just as one challenge is dealt with, there's another one comes along. Whether it's legislation, compliance, the government, the budget, we'll not go down that road. There's always something, but I have to say, and I'm absolutely, I'm a big glass half full girl, really. It's not. But at the moment, I think it's probably the hardest I've seen it. There are just so many things, but all at the same time. So obviously, the budgets have massive impact on all of us who are employing people. But the situation with electric vehicles, the government's blinkered approach, am I allowed to say that? And not kind of listening to the industry, Um, the situation being that customers are still not really looking to buy for whatever reason. I can't. There seem to be so many fears, the range anxiety thing, and uh, various other cost implications and bits and pieces. But for whatever the reasons are, the retail public aren't seeming to want to purchase as quickly as certainly the government were expecting them to. So the poor old dealer network and the manufacturers are so suffering with that. And of course, the spin-off of that is that we all do. Everybody who's in the industry suffers, because when there is a challenge like this, you know, companies look to see, well, where can they make savings and where can they make changes? And it's for people like that with services as I provide, you know, when things are good, it's customers look to maximize the good, and they invest in services that can help them make sure that, you know, everything's going exactly as it should be. But when things are hard, everybody cuts outsourcing probably at a time when they need it most. I mean, COVID was a perfect example of that as well, with, you know, dealerships being forced to close the doors and certainly not wanting us to make outbound calls to customers at that time. But with every challenge comes an opportunity, because for us, that's where we started doing inquiry management analysis, which continues to evolve and improve to this day. So I think for us, it's always about being able to add enough value for the customers, so that they are making money because of what we do. And I think in that way, we then become worth hanging on to in tough times. I mean, we certainly know that we do this with our, you know, retention work and lost lead follow up and that kind of thing. And again, in times when leads are few and far between and it's hard, that's apparent. I mean, that becomes easy to demonstrate in pound notes form. You know, we're fortunate that we've got some customers who are open with us about the success margins that they achieve on the back of what we do. But with other services, like, for example, your CSI follow-up and that kind of thing, so valuable for customer feedback. And of course, there's ultimately business success, but much less easy to quantify for a bottom line result. It's, you know, that makes it hard. But I think you asked me how we can help. And I think, again, you look at what is happening in the industry. With every challenge, there is an opportunity. And I think certainly the thing with electric vehicles at the moment, so maybe it's the ability to actually score and evaluate how those inquiries are being handled within a dealership. Are they being handled in such a way that the message is being communicated properly to customers? Or even outbound work where a message is being communicated in a certain way. You know, we can do that. There are a couple of people that spring to mind immediately who are trying to do this and trying to spread the word. I'll just mention quickly Michelle Breffett, who heads up Women Drive Electric, which is an awesome organisation set up entirely to do that and spread the word about electric vehicles and dispel some of the myths and the misconceptions and reassure and spread the good word. Yeah, I think very much there is still a lot of cloudiness and uncertainty, and I think there's a big reassurance message needed for the buying public.
It's fascinating, and I think I'd love to kind of, you know, hear more about sort of, you know, where we think this is going in terms of what can we be learning. It's, you know, because, you know, talking about sort of EV at the moment, it's still so immature, isn't it? It's still so early, and so we've got so much to learn because it isn't the same, right? So how do we adapt? How do we evolve? Not just in terms of the socioeconomic kind of climate we're operating in and the various kind of pressures that we're all very familiar with, but also the product itself, right? It's still so new. So that sort of, you know, that messaging that you talked about is that's that's really and you obviously are absolutely kind of front line there. How are you using technology and to kind of transform how you deliver the service to your customers? And if you can, try and bring it to life for me. Bring me, give me some real examples.
I'll do my best. It's for technology itself. The speed of change with technology is astonishing, isn't it? I mean, of course, I'm bound to say that because obviously, Justin, I'm the generation of moon landings, vinyl records the first time round, the BBC doing their first colour broadcast. So I'm bound to say that it's scary how quickly it moves. But my business is entirely cloud based, and when I first started in the world of work, that was unthinkable. Just couldn't happen. But not everything changes. I mean, for example, all the published studies still confirm that the majority of customers will contact a dealership by telephone as part of the buying process. So we're in a situation now with technology where 95% of automotive shoppers will look online, but very few, still very, very few, actually complete the full transaction online without contacting the dealership. So 61% will call the dealer after completing an online search. And human interaction is still a critical part of the industry. Trust is a huge element of a person's buying decision, purchase decision, and this comes through successful human-to-human interaction. So at Prospecting Dynamics, we are constantly evaluating how new technologies can help us, but we use it to enhance our human services rather than the other way around. Now, I have to say, though, managing a remote team has certainly become easier with technological advances, and it's also allowed us to make some of the services that we provide more efficient. I think, for example, if we think about AI, there are elements of AI that can be incorporated in some of what we do to streamline and just make it a little bit more efficient. But there will always be a need for some human involvement at some point, and I think that's never going to change. I mean, we have embraced it to improve efficiencies, but I think streamlining the front end, there are things like nuances of emotion, people's reactions. My team will listen for what's unsaid as well as what's said, and transcribing calls doesn't necessarily give you that. So whereas we might use some AI right at the beginning of a call to identify, is this a call that we need to actually qualify? When it gets down to the nitty gritty and looking at how the salesperson's actually handling it, I do think there's an element of human touch needed there, without a doubt.
Yeah, that's fascinating. What's unsaid, and I think we're moving fast to a point where even in this conversation, there'll be kind of insight being generated around our levels of engagement, between the two of us right now in this conversation, which will support kind of how we can be more adept and at understanding, who we're communicating with as humans. I wondered about the change in consumer behavior through the proliferation of mobile, and particularly, I suppose, in a sense, chat and WhatsApp. How have you blended that into your kind of business model?
I'm not a huge fan of chat, Justin, I'm afraid.
No,
I
totally.
think
It's good to hear.
Yeah, I'm really not. Having had several bad experiences of it myself, I think. I chat functions, unless they are actually have got a person ready to step in and deal with it, you end up in a loop, going round in a loop all the time. And I would be horrified if I thought that any service that we were providing to our dealer customers gave their customer a bad experience, because that's not what we're about. We're all about the customer experience and how can that be as good as possible. So I think things like chat or an auto response email and that kind of thing, it's great for getting the timings right, and for making sure that there is a quick response. Because I think, I'm a member of the Data and Marketing Association, and they're great at publishing stats and giving us information to look at about what's happening. And the last automotive stats I saw were something like 23% of dealers miss the follow up time on an email or a chat. And that's because it's hard. It's to actually physically have that facility available to do that. And I'm not sure that AI is clever enough yet to manage that interaction with a customer, so that a customer feels that they're actually being heard. At the moment, it's still very, very obvious that it's a bot or it's something along those lines. Certainly, as I say, the chat thing, and you find yourself saying, "Can I speak to a person?" Well, I can't. I'm afraid I can't help you with that. Right. Okay. So yeah, I think there definitely is a place for helping streamline and certainly time sensitive things for an initial contact, for an initial response. Um, but then to be picked up by a person.
I'm with you 100%. And, from my own personal, I totally agree with you. The first thing I do with any chat, is to say, speak to an advisor, and sometimes you have to type it twice. And the good businesses ping you over to an advisor. And then you're having a human, back to your point, you're having a human conversation. And I'm a multimodal type of guy, right? I'll pick up the phone, but if I'm busy juggling stuff, I might be using a chat client. So it's sort of needs must. But I love your point around sort of that immediacy point. They used to call it the golden hour, didn't they? Whereas now it's probably more
Absolutely.
like the golden minute sort of thing. You've
Yeah.
got to be there at that point when the need is there, and if you can then seamlessly hand that over to a human, great. Um, so look, we've talked a little bit about you being cloud-based, and we've been talking about AI and the proliferation of technology generally. How have the skills to do the job changed over time, and what gaps do you see across your business and the sector at the moment?
I have to say, across the sector, it's it must be terrifying within a dealership environment. Personally, it doesn't affect me too much. I'll come back to that, but I think looking if I look at my peers who are running dealerships, who are in that side of the business, and I think about the fact of how the actual product, the car, has changed so dramatically, and you've got the all the electric vehicles, and yet still they need to be able to maintain the older vehicles as well. Constantly changing technologies in the vehicles, still the older vehicles. I think changing skill set must seem almost overwhelming for managing a team who are working within a dealership. It must be overwhelmingly hard. It must be so hard, and not just after sales either. As we've talked about earlier, within sales itself, the teams have so much to stay on top of. Being able to talk about comparisons in technologies with different models and different franchises, and that's without even taking into account things like compliance, various other things that they need to be on top of and dealing with. Yet they still need the good old fashioned people skills as well. So with my team, as I say, I don't think I'm badly affected in terms of skills gap or anything like that at all. There are certain elements of technology, straightforward technology for us, that they need to be able to learn to work with. But really, it's all the soft skills, as we used to call them. With the phone team, for example, it's as we were talking about before. It's having a conversation. It's listening to the unsaid as well as the said. But it's picking up little nuances like a sentiment in a customer's voice, or being friendly but yet respectful and polite. My team are on average older than a normal call center, traditional call center, which I don't consider us to be a call center, by the way. I never refer to us as that. And I've previously worried when I've taken on young people, because I think the social media online age has taken away a lot of the necessity of good communication. So there are skills that aren't practiced anymore. And face to face, eye contact, listening to each other, not talking over people. A lot of the necessity of good communication seems to have disappeared with all that. And don't get me started on COVID either. I really worry about the effect that primary school children particularly the effect that it'll have had on those. But I have to say, the young people that I have employed consistently seem to prove me wrong. We've just one of our part-time students has literally just left us. He's just graduated university, so he's actually gone on to do his proper career now. And he was absolutely outstanding on the telephone. So again, I think a lot of young people benefit from the family background that they're in, and the way that whole family communication works. But some young people who don't have the benefit of that, I think they're where they will struggle with some of those those old-fashioned communication skills being lost, really.
It's interesting that you call them old-fashioned, but actually they're probably they are. No, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I actually think they're 21st century skills in a sense, right? And that sort of, we talked a lot about it already, but that sort of that empathy, the high, kind of EQ, and obviously doing that in the cloud or over the screen or on over the phone. That's really hard. How do you teach that?
Yeah, well, again, I'm really fortunate with the team that I've got. So, and this, some of this comes from that we've grown so slowly and over the years, and it's been word of mouth referral. But a lot of the people who work with me now have worked with me in previous career parts of my career. They've worked with me. A lot of them have dealership experience. I have people working with me who are married to people who used to work with me, and again, from the backgrounds where those kind of skills are something that they're using every day, so they're very, very, very good at that. When we take anybody on who's going to be actually on the telephones, there's a whole process to go through, and we do work at teaching those kind of skills. And there's a lot of role playing initially and work like that. But generally, when we recruit, we look for attitude and communication, and we say we can pretty much teach everything else. So if their attitude to work is great and their communication skills are good, or we can see that they can be good, that's really pretty much all we're looking for. And we can nurture that and draw that out as they spend time with us. Role playing, though, is something that we do quite a lot when we get a new project or a new customer. That's quite important. So our dealer customers, it always makes me laugh how people say, well, they're all the same and selling's the same, and there's an element which follows through, but some of the way that some of our dealer customers brand themselves quite differently to others, and they have different words, different communication that they like to have with their end retail customer. And you can quite often see that in the marketing, for example. They'll use certain terminology again and again, and it's their way. It's their way of communicating, and it's important for us to follow that through if we are going to be that seamless extension of the dealership's team. So we'll quite often, if we take on a project from a customer that we haven't worked with before, we'll spend a lot of time looking at their marketing, looking at their online presence, looking at how they communicate themselves to their network. And then when we pick up an initial project, depending on what that is, whether it's a sales or an after sales based project, again, we'll try and involve and pull their words and their terminology into our scripts. We do have scripts, although the team are all trained to have a conversation. So it isn't a case of we ask this question and then we ask this question. It's very much they'll talk to the customer, they'll ask a question, but they'll listen. And depending on where the customer is going, they will go with the customer. They have the script is there as a guideline to give them things that they mustn't forget to include at some point. But basically, they will have a conversation, and that's what we teach. We teach that you have a conversation with the customer, so it becomes very natural. And this is what would make the customer feel comfortable to have this conversation with us. I always say to our dealer partners, the one thing I can guarantee is that a retail customer of yours will be happy to have a conversation with us, and will go away saying, "I love dealing with Ken Brown because they always look after us so well and they're so nice to us on the phone," that kind of thing. So it's really important to us that we know that we're representing the brand of our dealer customer. We stand with that on our shoulders, so we take that very, very seriously. So as I say, we'll role play through a new approach, a new project. We'll start off, do a few calls, and then we'll stop. We'll all listen to those, and we'll talk it through. What's working well? What can we hear that the customers are liking? What could be better? What could change? We'll maybe make a few tweaks, and off we'll go again. So something that we take very seriously.
It's fascinating. I'd love to be a fly on the wall, to be honest. The other thing which I really loved about what you were just talking about there was the impact, of that, right? Of that human kind of brand kind of tone of voice, and really leaving that lasting kind of impression on that interaction, and you citing that as a measure of success, right? And so that's how you build long-term customers, for both you, but also for clearly, your customers, right?
Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about sort of how else you kind of measure success, I suppose. What are your kind of go-to metrics?
Okay, well, obviously, there's internal and external, I suppose. Again, managing a remote business, it's vital for us to have systems in place to understand efficiencies and productivity, but even more so quality control to ensure that our service levels are kept where they need to be. So it's funny, really, whilst I have a team of people whose job it is to evaluate how somebody's performing on the telephone, I seriously don't think you get an objective view if that's handled in-house. So, my team, looking at the quality of my team, I'm not sure I'd get an objective a view of that. So the management team obviously do review a percentage of calls and review with the team as well. And I'm very happy for us to do something publicly together where we'll listen to a call and we'll talk through and we'll say, this was great. We perhaps could have done this better as well. But we do work with a partner who helps us with quality control as well. But yes, it is important that the management team do a small element of that themselves for the purposes of ongoing coaching and motivation and the skill set of the actual team. But from an external perception, for us, I would say success is it's the long-term customer who continues to stay with us because we've become a necessary part of their business. It's the franchise within the huge organization who has to fight for the budget to keep us because they need the visibility that we bring to their management team. Or it's the telephone call I get out of the blue from somebody we've never worked with because we've been recommended to them. So, I mean, just we're a small medium company. There's always someone who is cheaper than us, and there's always somebody who can get through the work more quickly than we can. And we can't compete with that. We have to bring the value. We have to.
I love that, Nancy. I could talk, but forever with you, I think, at this stage. But I know you're very busy, and I really appreciate all the time you're giving us. So I'm just going to end on, I suppose, your career. You've been a pioneer in the space. You've kind of done. You've been every side of the table, as we talked about. You've also been a huge champion of female kind of leadership in the sector. If you were to sort of be sitting down with perhaps a young version of Nancy, thinking about where she goes next, what advice would you give to her coming into the industry today?
We go right back to the beginning here, Justin. I did say I'm evangelical about this. I absolutely feel, and we are getting there. We've got amazing women in the industry who are driving this, like Julia Muir, Sarah Sillers. The one piece of advice I give to anybody thinking about a career in the motor industry is just do it. It's amazing. Whatever you're interested in, whatever is the thing that sparks your imagination, that gets you excited, that gets you out of bed in the morning, whether it's marketing, legal, sales, customer care, senior management, whether you want to run your own business, there is a role. It's there. It's doable, and it's a great industry, and it's full of fabulous people, fabulous inspirational people. You look at some of our high achievers and role models, people that we've got in here. Dash Gupta, I know you've had on the podcast. Trevor Finn and Martin Kasher, and how they started Pendragon. That's so inspirational. Robert Forrest, and so many senior women now as well. Sue Corkin at Chorley Group, awesome lady. Sue Robinson, of course, heading up the NFTA. We have got so much inspiration, so much to look at as a role model for success. I think there's just so much good about this industry. Just do it. Just come in. Just join us. Jump in.
That's a great way to end it. Listen, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. I've really enjoyed this conversation, Nancy.
That was my absolute pleasure, Justin. Thank you for having me on today.